Hello and welcome back. It's time for another 5x5. You know how the should you buys go by now. I've done my full long hardware review and software review, and in this video I'm going to give you 5 reasons why this, the TS-464 from QNAP, their latest release for their flagship series, deserves your data, and 5 reasons why you might want to sit on the fence a little bit longer about it. So let's crack on with number 1. So first up, let's talk about memory. A lot of the things about this box that are really good stem from the CPU inside, and one of the benefits of that Intel N510 CPU inside this is the memory. It's one of the few SMB systems in the middle of the pack, those prosumers, before you get a bit Ryzen and a bit enterprisey, or when you go down to the lower pricey, value-y, cheap stuff. This is one of the few devices I've seen at this tier that supports up to 16 gig of memory. Arriving with 4 by default, that CPU over 2 slots allows you to upgrade up to 16 gig. And if you're an NVR user that's going to be using multiple cameras, and I'll touch on that later on, or you're a VM user, or you're running many client applications rather than you are running actual users, that extra memory is going to be incredibly advantageous. To go up to 16 gig on a mid-range 4-bay, again, lovely stuff. And indeed, in later videos, although this arrives with 4 gig that can be upgraded up to 16 gig over 2 8 gig slots, I will be looking at third-party memory, of course, non-QNAP memory at 8 gig, but I'm also going to be looking at 16 and 32 gig modules, because although the CPU inside Intel State does not support up to over 16 gig, we have seen applications of larger memory than that being utilized, and it's really a question of, is it even able to use that extra memory? So we'll be doing memory testing on this very soon and showing if you guys can even go even higher than 16 gig when you get your hands on one of these. Next up, that hardware. This system, although it is a Celeron powered system there in the middle, the sheer range of ports, connections and features that this has isn't just better than its predecessor that came before it. This system has got ports, connections and hardware options ingrained into it that put it better than any other 4-bay NAS I've ever had here on the channel. It's got NVMe SSD upgrade slots inside. It's got 2 2.5G ports there on the rear. It's got a PCIe upgrade slot that I'm going to go into more detail in a moment. It's got HDMI out. It's got inside, it's got the USB 3.2 Gen 2 on the front and the back with that USB copy button. It can be expanded with USB expansions on 2, 4, 6, 8 and 12 bay enclosures. The memory upgrades as well that I've already touched on, all of it just adds up to a system that is enormously expandable in a number of customizable ways, all from the bat. A lot of these are services that allow you to upgrade your hardware 3, 4, 5 years down the line in so many different ways, with the base level model giving you all these options but not charging you for them early doors. And again, the hardware inside this puts it as one of the best mid-range 4-bays I've ever seen. Next up, noise. This system, because it utilises this plastic chassis and it utilises a system of horizontal passive airflow with air coming via slits and side panels, as well as the base of the model with utilising a 120mm fan on the rear, it's actually surprisingly lower noise than you think it might be. It's not the quietest NAS, it's not a silent NAS, but for this 4-bay and taking advantage of a plastic chassis with metal on the internals, is actually a lot lower in typical noise levels when it's in operation than you might think. Now, it's worth mentioning there's a caveat there. If you utilise standard class hard drives like your Seagate Iron Wolves and your WD Reds in under 8 TB, they will be very quiet. But the minute you exceed 8 TB because of the way drives are built, or if you use enterprise level hard drives like Seagate Exos or WD Red Pro or an Ultrastar, the result is these drives make more noise than the chassis they are in, and there's no way to disguise that with the clicks, hums and whirs of the actuators reading the multi-platters. So again, surprisingly low noise system compared to other 4-bays I've talked about, and ultimately, if you use the right drives, this can be fairly set up and forget. Next up, I want to talk about that PCIe upgrade slot. It arrives with a PCI slot on the rear, which means you can add lots of bits and bobs to it. And unlike some brands that are quite proprietary, the QNAP platform has a huge range of first and third party upgrade card options. I don't know if you noticed earlier, but I've already installed the combo card inside this, and I'm going to be doing some testing with this card that has a 10G port inside and 2 SSD bays inside. Indeed, to go through the range of supported peripherals, even if you dust off it lightly, you've got 10 GBE, you've got combo cards that have got 10 GBE and SSD, you've also got dedicated SSD cards, you've even got Wi-Fi 6 upgrade cards to give this thing Wi-Fi 6, and then you've got USB upgrades that I've not even touched on, such as the 5 GBE to USB adapter from QNAP. There's even mods happening right now on GitHub that are looking towards taking advantage of USB to Wi-Fi 6 upgrades that are connectable to servers. What I'm saying is, and you can already use that in a VM on this by the way, the PCIe upgradability and even that USB stuff there that I talked about at the beginning, there's a huge range of ways to upgrade your bandwidth on this device, more than any other 4-base system I've talked about for a while at this price point. Remember, it knocks around for about 500 to 600 nicker with a huge array of hardware services to graduate towards. Now the next thing, it may seem like a bit more niche, but hear me out. A lot of people that look at the previous generation, the 53D series, and indeed that kind of mid-range Intel powered affordable tier, people that look at those solutions generally use them for standard backups, they use them for Plex Media Server and indeed media in general, they utilize them for surveillance, and this system is very, very surveillance ready. Not only does it support thousands of IP cameras like most NAS brands, but it arrives with that fully featured QVR program. It arrives with 8 camera licenses included with it, so you don't have to spend another 30 to 50 quid until you've used at least 8 cameras knocking around. But it also has support of that Google TPU, that little M2 adapter as well, that allows you to take advantage of enhancements in AI recognition in QVR face. Indeed, that can be used for other features too. The system arrives also with the support of USB cameras as well. So if you want to have a camera locally, you can attach a USB camera inside this, a nice high density Logitech or something, and then you have another camera for the local system there running into the surveillance program, along with loads of remote access cameras, Wi-Fi, LAN, whatever. And those 8 camera licenses are a big part of that. And remember, once you tap in to the expandability with the support of many, many different expansion chassis and the support of faster media in a multitude of different ways, this makes this a very, very good fully featured surveillance NAS for a lot of USMB users out there. But of course, nothing can be perfect, and along with those 5 reasons why I do highly rate this machine, there are 5 reasons that might make you want to sit on your wallet a little bit longer. So let's go through those. Number 1. Now, much like my surveillance point earlier on, this is, I think, a neg that a few people, it's a much nicher topic, but something a lot of you have reached out about, not just with this series, but the 53D that came before it. And that is that although this NAS is incredibly suited towards multimedia and has an HDMI output, QNAP kind of changed a few things. And first and foremost, they removed the included remote control. There's 2 QNAP remote controls, one of them a great deal more detailed than this with multi-app support on multiple buttons. But this is an additional purchase. It is not included anymore, where you just HDMI out to a connected monitor, use HD Station, access all of your multimedia in a lovely little slick graphical user interface, and sit there and browse all your box sets. You have to pay extra for the remote, and yes, there's a free mobile app called Q Remote, but that doesn't feel the same when you're on your sofa to use your mobile phone there. The second thing, they've got rid of the audio out. Now, some QNAPs used to have little speakers that not really got used. It was nice to have audio notifications of errors or anything that's happening as alerts, but more so, they got rid of the audio in, out, and phono sockets that a lot of these had. And a lot of people were enjoying that you could attach the HDMI to a powerful monitor, a powerful, HDMI TV and stuff like that. But you could also attach speakers and stuff like that and have a real fantastic cinema video experience and audio too. So the lack of those on there, I know, will be a little bit of a poke in the eye to some people considering this NAS for their multimedia setup. Now this next point isn't going to be a big negative for everyone, but still nonetheless, it is still a plastic chassis. And I know, although plastic chassis generally make a little less noise than their metal counterparts, a lot of people aren't overly keen on them in their surrounding environment. And even this system that I've not been using for a great deal of time has already got lots of grubby fingerprints on it. It's already got kind of dust and dust marks where I've been sort of moving it around. And plastic chassis show up the dust and marks and just generally don't look as sleek as metal after a long amount of time in an office unless they're kind of maintained and clean. It's a very minor point, but I know there's a lot of you out there that when you're looking at NASs and you're looking at that SMB flagship tier kind of prosumer releases, still not keen on the fact that they all seem to arrive in plastic chassis overall. Now this negative stems back again to this whole idea of the CPU allowing all these extra features. So the M2 SSD slots on this device are PCIe Gen 3 times 1. Now, why is that a big deal? Because when you put an SSD inside, a lot of modern SSDs in PCIe Gen 4 or Gen 3, they can provide performance of up to 3,000 or 4,000 megabytes per second relatively easily in the right hardware architecture. But they do that on times 4, whether it's Gen 3 or Gen 4 slots, to achieve that. Now, having a Gen 3 times 1 slot here means that the SSD you put inside is not going to be able to exceed 1,000 megabytes per second in its throughput. That's going to be the bottleneck there. Now, you've got two SSDs and you can raid them for the extra performance, but the fact still remains that an SSD inside this system, in those M2 SSD slots, not the traditional SATA ones, is going to have that slight bottleneck. Now, why is that? It's because the CPU is built up and how it supports connected things, everything from the individual SATA bays to the memory, to the connections, to the USB, all of that stuff. They all take up something known as PCI lanes. These is effectively the little tendrils that come out of the CPU and its chipset that allow it to do X amount of things at any given time. Now, in order for this system, much like my earlier plus point, to have 2.5 GB, to have PCI upgradability, to have M2 NVMe slots, to have USB 3.2, to have 16 gig of memory, to have all of those things, and HDMI as well, it needed to spread those PCIe lanes a little thinner. It could have maxed out and done a better PCIe slot or better SSD slots, but it wouldn't have had all the other tech. And the result is that the M2 SSD slots inside here are limited to 1,000 megs each. So do bear that in mind. They're still great to have in this 4-bay as a pool of storage or tiered storage or caching, but it's important to note that those SSD slots there do come with that caveat. That's right, it's not just the M2 SSD slots that have had to be ever so slightly streamlined. That PCIe slot on the top there is PCIe Gen 3 times 2, meaning that it can only produce a bandwidth of around 2,000 megabytes per second. Now, if you were going to use a 10G card in there anyway, that doesn't matter. If you were going to use a 2-port 10G card in there, that doesn't really matter because you're still within 2,000 megs. But the minute you're going to use SSD caching cards or ones that have got multiple M2 slots or NVMe slots or combo cards like this one, you're still only going to have 2,000 megs to play with if you're fully accessing everything at once, because remember, you're not always going to be using all of the bandwidth. Then you're going to max out that 2,000 and not get the full complement of performance. And if you're using 10G to its maximum degree first, it will have priority. It's a bit like load balancing in that regard. So just bear that in mind, that the PCIe slot on this is still better than the Gen 2 times 2 or 1,000 megs of its predecessor, but it still arrives with a slight cap there at 2,000, which a number of you looking at better cards might have a bit of a problem with. And finally, the other last thing about the device that might make you hold back is, of course, the subject of software, because the QNAP software on this is fantastic. They've got some really good software in terms of multimedia, in terms of business management, in terms of backup, in terms of CMS, in terms of all the AI-powered stuff, surveillance, virtual machines, Ubuntu, all of those features and functions on there. And although in the last year and a half to 2 years, there have been issues where they've been attacked by ransomware, they've still managed to push through all of that and still produce their software platform, making it more and more secure. Now, for some, it's still not going to be secure enough. And for others out there, they're going to wait and see and sit on the fence to see if it gets any better. But one area of software which they seem to have kind of not updated for a long time is that HDMI output. Now, I could go into more detail about the subject of security and ransomware, and I've already covered that in my 5 versus 5 of a couple of other QNAPs recently, as well as a dedicated video. So I didn't want to use up one of the 5x5s on this video for that. But I want to focus more precisely on HD Station, a great app for the system that sadly has been largely not given any big updates for at least a couple of years, maybe even 2.5. And when QNAP's selling points are its hardware, more precisely that they provide HDMI out and a huge range of first-party applications that can take advantage of this parallel HDMI out interface, as well as lots of third-party homebrew apps that are allowing people to run all manner of services with HDMI out supported on this. The fact that application has not seen many refreshes in the last 2 to 2.5 years really disappoints me, and I think it's something that QNAP have kind of dropped the ball on there. But this has been my 5v5. 5 reasons why you should have considered buying the 464 for your data, and 5 reasons why you might want to continue sitting on the fence. Thank you so much for watching. I have done a full long review linked in the description about this box. You can check that out. Also the written review over at NAS Compares. But if you do need help choosing the right solution for you, there is the free advice section over at NC. If you try to put a question in the comments, there's more comments than we can possibly answer in a day. It's much easier if you guys contact us on the free advice section so we can answer each question fairly in time-managed fashion. It is completely free. There's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. We don't do anything to your email. Couldn't give a stuff about your email. It might take us a day or so to answer your inquiry because it gets quite busy, but we're humans with lives who will give you the unbiased answer that we hope helps you choose the right solution for you. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.